So one of the most important parts of refereeing and developing as a referee is self-analysis. We can't rely on other people to always analyse our success. In terms of identifying areas of development, actually the most powerful person to identify them is ourselves, because we know ourselves better. I'm sure it's the same for most people. You tend to know coming off a field of play how you've performed. And I think it's good to set yourself standards that you may have that baseline of, I've put the maximum amount of effort in, I think I've had a good game. And that's a good starting point to be going into any sort of observation or mentor report or coach report. But there's a lot of pitfalls with self-analysis as well. I did a study of our national development group back in 2018 and looked at self-analysis. Some of the big areas that referees struggled on was actually identifying areas of development. So often people didn't actually identify the right areas of development. And when we went and looked at their observer reports and really sort of dug down into it, actually it was a completely different area. So referees tend to go towards, we found, the areas that they thought they could develop in as their areas of a weakness, rather than their actual specific areas of weakness that they were maybe actually quite apprehensive about approaching. Personality was a big one of those, that they felt if they actually admitted that they didn't have a strong enough personality, that would be detrimental to the refereeing career. So actually one of the key areas of self-analysis is identifying the right areas that we want to develop in. Strangely with referees, I think one of the most frustrating areas of refereeing is when I hear people say, oh, referees just pick up the money and go home. I know so few referees that do that. Actually, a big weakness of referees is people overanalyze their own performance. They go into too much depth. They stretch the self-analysis on for too long. They're still talking about issues in a game 2 or 3 weeks down the line, having not resolved them. So actually, I think a big pitfall of self-analysis is overanalyzing and not parking games, parking decisions, and accepting that, okay, we got this right, we got this wrong, this is how I could improve, but let's park it now and actually move that on. So there is a real capability of overanalyzing and over-scrutinizing your own performances rather than analyzing at the time and moving on. Self-analysis has to be a process that involves other people as well, despite the name of it. We self-analyze, but I think it's also important to have people around us that we can bounce ideas off. I would watch back every game that I referee. I'm lucky enough that I would get a recording of each game. That may work for you, may not work, but I find it's really, really important to pick up the general flow of the game. I would pick a lot up. And actually, it's my way of processing a game. So I tend to sit down on a Monday, watch the game from start to finish without pausing it, without looking at it. Yes, obviously there's replays and things like that, because that then lets me live through the game again. And then I won't watch it again. I will not go back and watch other maybe sort of small incidents that I want to go back and have a look at, but that's very much my way of processing a game. I will identify some things, I'll write them down. I'm very much a list maker, and I think that can work for quite a lot of people in writing down and almost assessing myself. So actually putting myself in the shoes of the observer and making those points. And looking back, and as I say, I would use spreadsheets a lot. So I would, after my games, note down some points that I think I've done well, because we often forget to do that as referees. We often forget to say, well, actually, I need to praise myself, but also look at key development areas that I've identified. And the ones I really want to look at are the ones that correlate with the last 5 games. So I tend to put it on a spreadsheet. I would make a list and look back and say, right, okay, for the last 3 of my 5 games, my positioning from counter-attacks hasn't been good enough. And that's my thing then to take forward to the next game. Equally, I could look and say, right, 5 games ago I identified that my whistle tone wasn't very good, but that hasn't come up since. So I can delete that, I can take it away. That was a one-off, it was one of those games. It's really, really important to have some sort of structure to self-analysis, because if you're operating on a game-by-game basis, they tend to become repetitive. I've seen self-analysis reports where it's the same thing every game. If it's the same thing every game, something's not right, because something's not being resolved on. Bouncing your thoughts off other people are really important as well. Sometimes we get stuck in a rut with self-analysis that we're like, well, I don't really know what areas I want to be looking at. I'm looking at the same areas all the time. I don't know how to fix this. bounce that off other people, because what you may find is that person may be really strong in one area, and that's the opposite area to what you're strong in. So you can really use that person to bounce off in. Much like a lot of the things, it's really important to have a time scale to self-analysis as well. There's absolutely no point in stretching something out weeks, months, if it's the same. So actually saying, right, okay, I want to look at this area, I want to think about this area, but do you know what? After 3 weeks, I'm going to change that. I'm going to keep it varied. I've seen too many referees get stuck in a confidence cycle. Refereeing is very, very much about confidence. That's why it's so important that we make the effort of identifying our strengths as well and praising ourselves, because the last thing you want as a referee is to be overcritical and see your confidence wear down and down and down. It's like a striker in front of goal. The best strikers in front of goal, when they're confident, they can score without even thinking about it. You know when you're refereeing well, you know when you go onto a field of play and you are seeing decisions like that. It's so natural. It's when you start overthinking and overcomplicating it that it becomes more detrimental. And if you've been worrying about your foul recognition for the last 5 weeks, what are you going to be thinking about most? Foul recognition. Therefore, what are you going to be thinking about on the field of play? I know I had a colleague who had a real issue with penalty kicks for the first start of the season. That's because he'd overanalyzed the decision in the first game of the season around giving a penalty kick, and then subsequently didn't give 3 penalty kicks because subconsciously he was worried about giving penalty kicks. And that cycle will grow and grow and grow until you do something to change it. Once we've self-analysed something, park it, move on, regain the confidence. And there really is a process on that as we're coming up to match days.